No problem. No problem. What's going on, everybody? This is Kano from the Gamer Section back with another interview. And without further ado, we gotta introduce the man of the hour. You know what? Let him introduce himself. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Chris Mango. I'm actually a high school math teacher from New Jersey and a private math tutor. And on the side, I recently developed the game Mango Mischief over the past 2 years, which is a satirical retro style JRPG.
Yeah. First and foremost, to everybody that's tuning in, man, this man just dropped the game today in Steam stores right now, and y'all gotta congratulate him. Go buy the game if you haven't bought the game. First and foremost, that's phenomenal, man. So let's go ahead and get started with these questions. I got questions about this game and everything. So the first question, I always ask a lot of game developers these questions. So this question is like this: what was the first game that you actually had played that made you fall in love with gaming?
So I played a lot of games growing up. I played Atari with my mom growing up, and I played Super Nintendo games. I think, and Game Boy games. I think the one that made it more than just a fun activity for me was when I was 8 years old. We got the N64, dropped in 1996. I think it came out in like September. We got it for Christmas. And we got 3 games. We got Super Mario 64, we got Wayne Gretzky's Hockey, and we got Cruisin' USA. And playing Super Mario 64, and when the game starts up with the camera doing 3D, and when you start Bob on Battlefield with the 3D look and everything, just seeing who I knew to be Mario just being in an extra dimension, it just blew my mind. So I'm pretty sure that was probably like the most influential early-ish video game I ever played, which made me just super want to keep playing, and it just hit all of the things I was looking for.
Dope, man. Super Mario 64 and then the other 2 titles you announced, those are classic games for the N64. Those are some games I played growing up too back in the day. Wow. Bring back a lot of memories. So like, how did you get into game development though?
Well, I do not have a background in game development. I don't have a background in coding, computer science, don't know how to program or anything like that. And so as I played lots and lots of video games for the past almost 30 years, I had always been kind of wondering, as there were games I was passionate about, as there were other games that I liked, but maybe, if I had to say, would have tinkered with it a different way. I would always kind of ask myself, I wonder if, would it ever be possible for me who doesn't have a background in that to ever actually make a game? And so really, like when COVID hit a couple of years ago, knowing that like everything was going to be closed down, knowing that, the school I'm teaching at was going to switch to remote learning, I was going to have a lot more time on my hands, can't go out, don't need to worry about commuting to work because I'm teaching from home and all of that. I knew I was going to have a lot more time. So I just started doing a pretty deep dive into just Googling and YouTubing, like, are there game engines for people who don't have the traditional skill set needed to make games from the ground up, like kind of user-friendly, noob-friendly game engines. And so I saw a few, and one that really stuck out to me was RPG Maker. There were a lot of tutorials on YouTube to really kind of hold your hand. There were a lot more plugins to allow for some modifications and customizations to really kind of make it how you want it to be. And I seemed to get a feel for it over the next year or so, and I started putting together some ideas from just different RPGs I played growing up, things I kind of wanted to emulate, things I liked from old school RPGs and JRPGs, and putting my own spin on it, which was a little bit of satire and really poking fun at some of the overused tropes and cliches, some of the things that are used kind of far too often in RPGs that we kind of take for granted. And I started kind of formulating it together, and it worked out really well because I didn't need to rely on any sort of background in programming. I could get by with just doing a lot of research and asking a lot of stupid questions to people who knew way more than I did, because the community there, the forums there, everyone was just super receptive. And the fact that everyone there was very supportive made it a lot easier to kind of take like 1 or 2 or 3 steps into the game development process.
Right. So you said something about JRPGs. Like, what was the JRPGs that you was playing back in the days that kind of inspired you to create this game here?
So There were a lot of really, really good ones, like the old school Final Fantasy games, Dragon Warrior,
Hmm.
Dragon Quest, those games, Golden Sun. Um, there were some JRPGs that are classically not so good, but I still enjoyed playing just because if it was maybe like the N64 genre or generation.
Hmm.
Like Quest 64 was a notoriously not good JRPG, but
Yeah.
I still enjoyed playing it. Like uh, it took a lot of chances with doing things a little bit differently than some of the other better known, better received games like Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross,
Hmm.
and Quest 64 just really didn't do it too well. But there were so many things in games that were just okay, or games that were
Right.
amazing that I could still just take as feedback and just kind of mold into combining certain things a certain way that I would want to do it. So those are
Hmm.
kind of the JRPGs that kind of inspired me from like the Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1, a little bit of PlayStation 2 eras.
Right, right. Most definitely, most definitely. So let's go ahead and talk about Mango Mischief, this new game that you just released today. Okay. So, like, within this game, though, like, where does this game actually take place? What was the setting behind this game here?
So, I think coming up with the name of the world was the last thing I actually ended up doing, and it was just
Hmm.
as an attempt to get another tired trope. Because whenever you open up a map in a game, like you've got your maps for the little dungeons and the little towns, but then you have kind of the overworld map.
Hmm.
As you're sailing from island to island and stuff. So I just went
Right.
ahead and called the world literally Overworld. So it's the world of Overworld, and
Hmm.
inside there's a whole bunch of different towns and dungeons and areas to explore.
Hmm.
Um, but obviously, it's very very similar to a typical Earth type setting.
Okay. Okay. That sounds dope. So that's very dope. So, what about the protagonists in the game? Like, what is the backstory of each of the protagonists, and like, where does it begin in the beginning with these protagonists?
Sure. So there's four main protagonists. You'll have your kind of typical party of four, and we kind of make fun of that a little bit as well. Um,
Right. Right.
And so you get introduced to each character one at a time, and you'll first get introduced to a young girl named Marion who is left at a daycare by her mother. Her mother
Hmm.
has to go run errands for the king, and Marion's kind of lonely, kind of doesn't really fit in with the other girls, and so she decides to basically run away and make her way to the castle. That way, she
Hmm.
can attempt to see her mom. And so that's
Right.
kind of Marion's very like 5 minute. You have her for just a couple minutes. You kind of get a feel for how like combat works in a very basic setting. And
Hmm.
once you essentially run Marion to the castle, um,
Hmm.
the game clips over to you playing the next playable character, Iraq, who
Right.
he is attempting to find medicine for his, to avoid spoilers, his sick friend Rania. Um, and he's having some trouble finding medicine in the areas he's looking, so he wants to go to the king because maybe the royal family can help get some medicine for Rania. So there's kind of
Right.
a background as far as the motivations to why both Marion and Iraq are heading to the castle for two very different reasons.
Okay.
Marion ends up being more of your like agile fighter, quick hits, rogue type, thief type, archer, sniper, assassin, like all of that in a nutshell, physical
Right.
fighter.
Hmm.
Iraq ends up being more of a light mage. So he does the heals. For the most part, he'll do a lot of like light damage, and eventually you'll get to kind of do some dark damage as well. He gets a little bit of that hybrid going on. He can buff your party or remove any sort of debuffs or status ailments. As soon as Iraq makes his way to the castle, which again is after a
Right.
pretty short amount of time, where you're getting a few new pieces of information and mechanics introduced to you. Then we move on to Mero, who's kind of the happy-go-lucky dark magician, dark mage type. She also casts elemental magics. There's like 8 different elements in the game. There's fire and water, earth and
Hmm.
wind, ice and thunder, and light and dark. And her background is she's essentially a teacher, an instructor. Um, Yet while she is passionate about teaching and likes teaching, she oftentimes goes and does her own thing in terms of fighting monsters or going off to explore or off adventuring. And so
Hmm.
the supervision aspects and the responsibility aspects of the teaching don't really
Hmm.
seem to fit too well with Mero's kind of like free spirited nature. So, in an attempt to kind of regain her reputation, she heads off to the castle for reasons. And so,
Right.
once you have kind of a short walkthrough with Marion, Iraq, and Mero, you end up getting to the castle where you meet the fourth playable character, because they didn't really want to have everyone play through 4 times in a row. You'll meet
Right,
the
right.
fourth character, Sprig, who is one of the knights of the royal family of the castle, where he's kind of your tanky physical damage dealer, kind of high physical attack and defense and HP. Um,
Hmm.
and the general, at least the original plot device is that, neither Marion nor Iraq nor Mero can actually see the king because the king is missing. He went off to go with his caravan to go explore and try to pick up some items, and no one seems to know where he is. Sprig has
Hmm.
a lead though, so Sprig takes the other three, and the four of them start to go off adventuring together because everyone has their own reasons to want to speak to the king or save or at least find the king.
Okay, dope, dope, dope. That's very, very interesting with this game. It's very intriguing and very exciting with the character formation. So let's go ahead and talk about the gameplay aspect of it. Is it more like a traditional RPG of the tactical RPG, or do you have some action RPG elements where you could just attack them at any given time, or you just have to wait to play like the tiff attack system in the game?
Right. Since I wanted to inspire it, since I wanted to be inspired by the old school turn-based JRPGs, that's the specific setup I had.
Mm-hmm.
Not your kind of newer school action RPGs. It's not like a Fire Emblem or Tactics Advanced based RPG. It's your old
Mm-hmm.
school Golden Sun or Chrono Trigger, or your new school Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default type. So it's got the turn-based elements. I think the closest is I based off of Final Fantasy X's turn-based
Mm-hmm.
system, which is like conditional turn-based, where
Right.
the beginning turn order is based on like your speed level,
Mm-hmm.
but you can take actions throughout the combat, which can raise your speed, lower someone else's speed. There are some attacks which force a little bit of a delay, or you can attack quicker. So throughout the actual battle, for
Mm-hmm.
various reasons, based on different skills you end up using or your opponents end up using, the turn order can shift from time to time. Like, it might be the case that you get to attack twice in a row, or the enemy gets to attack twice in a row for various reasons. But it is your old school turn based. I like that because I like the strategy involved in taking a moment and thinking about what the best move is, kind of analyzing the combat, looking for weaknesses that the different enemies have, and
Right.
going out of your way to choose the same skill. I know that
Mm-hmm.
with some action RPGs, things get a little bit too chaotic and a little bit too frantic.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them do it. Some of them deal with that very, very well. But I kind of like the slower moving JRPG that is turn based and a little bit more thought provoking. And obviously, when you get the hang of some things, you might have a pretty fast idea of exactly what you want to be doing. So the
Mm-hmm.
battles can still move along pretty quickly.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. So, within the battling system, like what type of abilities are within the battling system that each of the protagonists can use in the game?
So Sprig and Marion tend to be more of the physical based damage dealers, although they'll get to
Mm-hmm.
use elemental moves later on in the game. I wanted to make enough overlap and versatility so that way you're
Mm-hmm.
not just strictly confined to only one character being the only person who could deal damage in a certain scenario. So
Right.
that means sometimes having enemies have different weaknesses. Maybe an enemy's weak against a certain element, but also has low physical defense. So you can kind of attack it in different parameters. There's 8 different status elements to do. You've got your typical like poison, you've got your sleep, you've got your confusion, your charm, kind of those as well.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Sprig is oftentimes going to be doing very large, either single or double blows, physical attack wise. Marion, you can attempt to do some sort of riskier moves that may or may not pay off.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Mero, you've got magic attacks, you've got elemental moves as well. And Iraq, you also have magic attacks, spells like dark spells and light spells. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone can cast different buffs on your party. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
can cast debuffs against the opponents. Each character has their own sets of buffs and debuffs to kind of contribute. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, since Sprig's all about that physical damage, he's the one who usually boosts the party's physical attack, or
Right.
maybe
Right.
lower the enemy's physical attack. Since Mero is all about the magic attack and being the high level damage dealer in terms of magic, she'll be the one kind of boosting magic in that respect. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different skills that I kind of wanted to kind of integrate into each of the four characters, where there's some overlap, but there's some unique abilities, especially in the later parts of the game when you level up really, really high in terms of different classes,
Right.
where yeah, that way they each kind of come into their own identity as well.
Okay, most definitely. So, like, more into the battle systems, like, does it have a ability where you can summon any type of monsters, or is that in this game at all? Like, summoning like big monsters or whatever to fight the enemies.
So for a short amount of time, I thought about two things related to that: either summoning monsters to fight for you, like summoning your own monsters, like aeons or other really huge spirit-esque guardian beings, like Final Fantasy type, or some sort of
Mhm.
like Beastmaster, where you can like capture other animals or enemies and have them fight for you.
Right,
But
right.
when I was looking into the games that integrated those very, very well,
Hmm.
I noticed that those weren't just kind of like half-assed one-off mechanics that were like alternative. They were like really fundamental to the combat
Right, right.
for it to do really well. Um, and I didn't really want to base my game. I didn't want to surround my game based on those things. So
Hmm.
what I did is, despite the fact that like those can obviously be flashy and awesome looking, I was trying to figure out what niches would they
Hmm.
normally fill. Like, why do you have those sorts of summoning type monsters?
Right.
Um, for allies in an RPG. And so I sat down and kind of mapped out what types of skills or positions they would be useful for, and I just
Hmm.
made sure that I integrated those skills and positions into the classes and into the
Right.
higher level skills anyway. So
Hmm.
you know, there are no you're not summoning a monster to fight for you, but
Hmm.
the versatility and the spectrum of skills you end up developing for each of the four characters,
Hmm.
I think, do a pretty decent job of kind of covering whatever those monsters would have been used for.
Dope, dope. So, speaking of upgrades and skill sets, like within the upgrading skill sets, is the way you're doing it is by fighting enemies, or there's other ways about getting these upgrades?
So, sure. So for the most part, you'll gain experience through combat.
Okay.
Now there are a few other ways that you can gain experience. You can gain experience through exploring, because there's plenty of side quests to take care of. There are plenty
Hmm.
of other towns and other buildings and other dungeons, which um, might be related to side quests or might not
Hmm.
be contingent. You don't necessarily need to explore a certain dungeon to maybe beat the game. And so, as a reward, besides having cool items and good gear and stuff in chests that you can find there, you can also gain experience from exploring those areas too, just as like an additional incentive
Hmm.
to really look everywhere, as opposed to just trying to have like a linear attempt at completing the game as quickly as possible.
Right, right, right. So speaking of dungeons, right? What type of this is a two-part question. Like, what type of dungeons are in the game, and do it have like small dungeons or dungeons within the dungeon where you have to like fight sub bosses to major bosses?
Sure. Um, so the beginning, maybe one third, or maybe the first third or first fourth of the game is relatively linear,
Hmm.
where you're kind of going forest after forest, or the dunes, or just general dungeons to gather a few pieces of information, a few items. Um, and so those dungeons are a little bit more straightforward. They
Hmm.
don't have too many crazy puzzles. It's more of just getting a feel for how the game mechanics work and kind of the expectations for like Mango Mischief in general.
Hmm.
Um, but then for the majority part of the game, it switches to essentially completely non-linear, where I've got eight
Right.
different dungeons with completely different um, fundamentals. So, for example, you might have like a lava dungeon where you kind of want to dodge the lava in certain areas. You want to be careful where you're walking. Um,
Right.
some dungeons have random encounters. Some dungeons have visible encounters, and that sort of eternal struggle and argument between liking or not liking either of those types of encounters is addressed in the game as well. You might have another dungeon where there's an underground maze with water pillars that come up at different times, and so you've got to time certain movements in that respect. There's another dungeon which is almost entirely puzzle based, where
Hmm.
moving from room to room, yeah, there's a couple enemies, but the emphasis is on figuring out what is going on in the room or how to get through the door, and that requires a little bit of out of the box thinking. So there's your traditional dungeons where you just
Right.
run to the end, and most of them have a single boss. One of them has a mini boss. But I tried to make each of those, especially non-linear, middle and late game type dungeons, different enough
Right.
that you'll have to kind of take into consideration what kind of gear you're using, what types of skills you're going to be using, and what are kind of the interesting, kind of unique elements of the
Hmm.
specific dungeon. Because the last thing I wanted is I mean, no one wants to play like the same dungeon over 8 times in a row.
Hmm.
Um, I find it to be particularly boring when you have like one skill that you just know you're just going to use for the rest of the game. Like, all right, I had 20 skills, but here's the one that's going to get me through the rest of the game. I didn't
Right.
want
Right.
players to fall into that trap or into that mindset. So I tried making the encounters kind of dynamic and different enough, the characteristics of them, as well as the general dungeon different enough that you have to kind of think a little bit more strategically about each of the different dungeons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes plenty of sense. I definitely feel where you're coming from. And I bet you a lot of people that's, if not tuning in this now, that will be tuning in later and be like, wow, I definitely want to play this game. So here is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Okay.
Okay. This is a billion-dollar pitch type of question.
Oh, okay.
So why should people want to actually play this game? This is like a pitch question right here.
Mhm. Yeah. So originally, I wanted to make the game. I wanted to make a game that I was really, really proud of, using
Hmm.
characteristics and elements that I found nostalgic growing up. That kind of brought me back to not necessarily Super Mario 64, like we talked about, but
Right.
the old school genre of JRPGs. So the writing and character development I have in the game, I think does a good job of reminiscing back to those days of storylines and that JRPGs use. I think
Hmm.
there's a good balance of having serious, substantive plot points, combat mechanics, gameplay mechanics, while
Right.
also doing a pretty good job of balancing some pretty serious humor, lots of references, whether they're based on video games or other real world references that I think you'll get and appreciate.
Hmm.
Not just RPG references, because
Right.
I've had some people play the game who are not RPG fans and they still appreciated a bunch of the references and a lot of the humor. Um, Another thing is I wanted to make a game that actually utilized like real puzzles, not just
Hmm.
like fetch quests. Like fetch quests are going to be a part of most games anyway, um,
Right. Right.
but a lot more in-depth, complex, like actually needing to look around the atmosphere or look around the town that you're in and pick up clues and actually do a good job to progress. So
Hmm.
not just having it be I'm super strong, I can beat the enemy, but like what
Hmm.
other challenges can I create throughout the game as well? Um,
Hmm.
I like writing puns and bad, corny jokes. So you know, if you're okay with laughing at those too, and there's enough fourth wall breaks in there that they'll even
Hmm.
call out the corny jokes as well. Um, so the players who I've seen play my game so far seem to consider it to be
Hmm.
a great callback to the old school JRPGs. And
Hmm.
even those who haven't played JRPGs in general, let alone the
Right.
old school ones, seem to have a
Hmm.
wonderful time playing it. And besides the battle mechanics and the customizations that go into the different classes that you'll be going through and the gear that you're taking, there's still enough of the writing, the humor, the puzzles, the puns that I think there's something in it for most gamers.
Right.
Now that being said, full disclosure, if the only thing you really really care about is like mind blowing new edge graphics, you know this is RPG Maker, and this is kind of supposed to be a traditional old school retro style 8-bit 16-bit. So
Hmm.
you know, you're not going to have mind blowing PS5 level graphics on here. Just full disclosure. But I think what I intended to create and the things that other players said they appreciated, I think I kind of hit those elements for the most part.
For sure. For sure. Second to last question. Okay, so what type of music is actually on this actual game? Like, give us a breakdown of the soundtrack within this game.
Uh, can I play the music?
Yeah, you can.
It, it, it's I mean, I think someone described it as synth wave. Um, Actually, let me get the exact. Actually, you know what? I mean, I tried my best to do to use the old school music. It was interesting because RPG Maker actually has a lot of songs
Mm-hmm.
that fit nicely in different terrain settings. So in some of the terrain settings that I created, they were actually based off the music. Sometimes I had
Mm-hmm.
audio first and just kind of sat back and thought about like, all right, this is kind of the jingle bell ish Christmas type winter music. So let's have
Right.
some areas with some like nice snowfall and stuff. There's some other
Mm-hmm.
ones which really screamed out desert dunes and sand and lots of that. There's also towers with more hyped up music. The music in my game trailer has is one of the final castles of the game, and so that's a little bit more hardcore rockish again type music. The battle music is kind of your traditional old school JRPG where you can listen
Mm-hmm.
to it over and over again because you're going to have to because there's a lot of battles in the game. So it's if you're thinking of old school um, Final Fantasy type battle music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or instrumentals, I think you'll find that it parallels it quite nicely.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting. Very interesting. So we know that it's out now. So where can they actually find this game?
On Steam, it's for the PC. It's on Steam. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can also go to mangomischief.com where all the social media is there too. You can go to my Twitter at Mango Mischief. I have an Instagram at Mango Mischief Video Game. But if you just want to go directly to the Steam link, that's probably the fastest way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Besides that social media, I also have a YouTube channel where I'm posting lots and lots of videos, either ones that I'm creating or that players have created too, if you want to kind of see a couple of clips or a lot of clips by now. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different paths you can take to ultimately get to the Steam page for Mango Mischief.
Okay. One final question. We do know that this game is going to that it's on PC right now. Is it going to be exclusively only on PC, or you plan on putting it on other platforms?
For now, it's just going to be PC. I don't have any plans to change them to other platforms like consoles or anything like that. I looked into it, and a lot of the plugins and ways I've customized my game makes it very, very difficult to simply port to the console, or the amount you'd have to kind of rewrite seems to be
Mm-hmm.
very, very difficult. So for the foreseeable future, I'm just going to say PC exclusive.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks. This has been another fantastic interview that we have just conducted. The link will be in the description for everything related to this interview and all the games, including Mango Mischief, which y'all need to go ahead and check out today. It has been released today in the Steam store, so y'all definitely go check it out. So make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell for when we drop new content. Thank y'all and have a good day.